Hey there everyone, and welcome to the March edition of our technically new Q&A series. We've done this before with a couple individual videos, but especially, and I'm aware it's April now, these were questions that were collected in March, but especially as the channel has grown, although one of my favorite things is about doing the channel is to get to read all the questions and try to answer as many as I can, it's been a bit more difficult since there are more people now to actually get the same information out, or if people have similar questions, then trying to keep up with that. So I thought something that would be fun, especially during everyone self-isolating now and maybe needing more stuff to watch or listen to, is every month I'm going to try to collect questions from patrons, Twitch subs, channel members, as well as YouTube subscribers, and answer them in this kind of video where I'll get through as many questions as I can in a reasonable amount of time. The way it's going to work is that I will prioritize questions posted on the Patreon post. So we'll try to go through those first, and then I'll take submissions from the comments, just because it was originally kind of envisioned as a patron Q&A, but I figured it would be probably better to put it out there for everyone as well. So if you have any questions for the April edition, I know it's already April, then leave them in the comments here. There will be a post going up on Patreon for channel members, Twitch subs, and patrons. And then I'll combine those, try to see what comes up a lot, try to address the patron questions first, and then I should also be able to get through a lot of YouTube questions as well. But yeah, so we're gonna get started. There are about 12 questions, and especially because I figured since it's the first time doing it, there's going to be a lot more in one place. Whereas over the next few months, it'll probably be more of a spread out thing. But there are a few that cover modding stuff here, a few that touch a little bit on different, or on some similar topics, especially when it comes to like mod design and balance. So I'll just read through them. I've got them on my phone. I'm not just texting during the video recording. That would be very rude. Geez, my hair is looking weird right now. But I think we'll start off with this one from Marmar. Corey, what is the one YouTube comment that made you smile and want to keep going? There is something that stands out to me from this, that it isn't necessarily YouTube, but the Steam Workshop comments for the mods are often very stressful to go to, because it's something that doesn't really keep any record of anything. It's often like people, if they're enjoying a mod, they're less likely to comment. They're just going to comment about problems. So I woke up on my birthday and I saw that there was like 20 new comments, and it's like, oh, fuck. But then I went to the workshop and it was pretty much all just comments wishing me a happy birthday. And that was really nice. Because it was like that's when I really realized the amount of dread I kind of get from seeing my Steam notifications. And yeah, so that was like the complete opposite of what I expected going into it. Like YouTube comments, that's generally more positive. There's only like one person who made it their life's work to apparently comment on videos multiple times a day. Maybe I'll edit in a picture, but that might be giving them too much attention and encourage them to keep doing it. But yeah, so YouTube comments have generally been relatively positive. Whereas Steam Workshop is just like scary to go in. And that day it was not, which was really nice. So we'll go to Nova Crusader 727's question next. When adding, reworking, rebalancing units, do you prioritize accuracy to the source material, or do you prioritize purely from a gameplay perspective? And I think, was there something similar to that? Yes, so Maticus Sama also asked a semi-similar question, so I'll try to address them together. Maticus said, do you find it difficult to balance playable factions while maintaining lore accuracy? What factions were the most difficult to implement, especially in terms of unit availability, and finding a way to make them interesting to play without being a carbon copy of other factions? For example, making Zinch feel different from your Empire, or Ride of Authority, etc. So, like Maticus's question there is a bit more about the faction side of things. Nova Crusader is more about individual units. So, first and foremost, we are making a game. The lore is usually used to inform where the units and factions should fit in, but then we also sort of choose units based on where they fit into the lore as well. So it kind of reinforces each other. Usually if something is too far off in the lore from what we'd want to do, we just wouldn't use it. So gameplay is first. Lore is still a very important consideration because we are trying to make a sandbox game within that universe, where people who are familiar with the universe can come in and like they'll have a general expectation of what they're going to get, but also people who may not be as exposed to the universe can come in, and like the way we represent stuff shouldn't be too like it has to have some differences and there's some allowances for gameplay there, but people should come in, if they see a ship doing one thing, it should represent what that ship was used for. And that often helps inform what a faction's going to look like. So, for example, more towards Maticus's point, the way that we handled the Imperial factions in the mod, for example, we tried to pick a theme for each one. So, like the Greater Maldrude, we tried to push them a bit more towards like lighter heavy frigates, less on the capital ship side. The Pentastar alignment, since it's in the Outer Rim, we tried to give them more Clone Wars units, because after the Clone Wars, a lot of the leftover hardware would have been put out on guard duty in the Outer Rim, which has kind of given the impression that it's a Clone Wars faction. And I think we've contributed to that being an impression within the broader community, which is not really our intention. Because with those factions, you could realistically, lore-wise, put every unit everywhere. There would have been like some makeup, some level of each unit in each one. But that obviously isn't great for gameplay, and you kind of have to narrow it down to like 20 units for the build bar. So we try to take like the spirit of the lore and try to represent that in gameplay as well as possible. The space reworks have involved a lot more of that. That is something that Nolan especially has spearheaded along with Bob and Jorrit, and then I mostly contributed on stuff like the Empire of the Hand. But a lot of what we're trying to do with that is we figure out what sort of level the unit's supposed to be at, what is it supposed to be doing, how is its armament supposed to be represented, and then from that we can get a general power level for the unit. It's basically a calculation based on their damage and hull and some other capabilities like the fighter loadout, and then that's used to inform the pop cap and the credit cost. So in that way we can kind of still make gameplay take precedence over the lore without having to just kind of get rid of the lore. So people can like if something is really expensive in universe, we'd probably disregard that more in favor of making the cost represent more of the capabilities of the ship, if that makes sense. And I think there was another element to Maticus is there. What factions were the most difficult to implement, especially in terms of unit availability, and finding a way to make them interesting to play without being carbon copy of other factions? So the Empire of the Hand is obviously a fairly difficult one from the perspective of available units. The CSA would kind of be right after that, but with the Empire of the Hand, it's kind of a double-edged sword because we get to invent whatever we want, but we have to invent whatever we need. So for a long time, the Empire of the Hand, especially on ground, you can still see a lot of this. Their units ended up being fairly boring and generalist in some cases because they have so few, they needed to cover a lot of bases with what they do have. And with the space reworks, we're trying to move away from that a bit, specialize the factions a bit more. But with the CSA, because it's not a faction that really has galactic ambitions while still having kind of shitty units, it was a bit more difficult to do. But at the same time, what we try to balance around for factions is more getting the tactical balance. So a 300 PopCap fleet versus a 300 PopCap fleet should generally translate to a similar amount of credits and a similar amount of overall combat power, even if the way that's expressed is different. So if one faction, it may be more carrier prominent, some factions may have more ships in that 300 PopCap and in those credits, but it may be weaker individual ships. So like the CSA and the Confederacy of Independent Systems kind of fall into that. The Republic falls into more of like better individual units, but fewer of them. And then on the galactic map, we kind of build around the idea that it's not always going to be a balanced start, but we try to have enough different starting positions that people can play any faction and feel like they have a start that kind of suits them, and we try to do that with with difficulty levels as well. So if you're playing the CSA on hard on Empire's End, that should be difficult. It's going to be difficult because we have a very varying amount of experience in our player base as well. So we want something that can appeal to newer players as well as appealing to older players. So like when people say the New Republic Era 1 start is really difficult, then that's why you can start in Era 2 when they're a bit more established. So we try to cover it that way. We're less concerned about making sure every galactic conquest is balanced in terms of starting positions. Rather, we try to document how difficult each one is and make sure that there is something available for that faction elsewhere. So hopefully that answered your questions, but thank you very much, Marmar, Maticus-sama, and Nova Crusader. Our next question is from 3Cole. What got you into Empire at War modding in the first place? So, before Empire at War, I didn't know what modding was. I think the first time I saw Empire at War would have been in a trailer that was either on the Revenge of the Sith DVD or the Battlefront. It came with Battlefront 2. Yeah, I used to think it was one and then found out it was the other. I can't remember which direction that went, though. I think it was on the Battlefront 2 DVD, but like we had a family computer that was on dial-up internet in 2006, and I had very limited computer time. It was a computer that we'd had since like 1998, because I could play Age of Empires 2 and nothing else, pretty much. So I was like, there's no way I'm going to be able to play this. But I started going to Empire at War message boards, because up to that point I'd been kind of active on like GameSpot, the message boards there. And I started making like a union. I think I made like an Empire at War union or something, which was these kind of like group message boards you can make on GameSpot. But then I found a mod called Legacy of War. Like I started Googling around for Empire at War stuff. And I found a mod called Legacy of War. And I didn't know what a mod was. So Legacy of War was kind of like the original Thrawn's Revenge almost, in terms of like what we were trying to cover. And like I saw the stuff they'd posting. At that point, the game wasn't out yet. This was probably around December 2005. The game came out in February 2006, I want to say. So yeah, they were posting models that they were making up leading up to the game's release, and I was sitting there waiting, reading all the updates. And then the game released and no mods. And I was like, hey, what gives? I thought we were getting the mods. Because I didn't realize, like, obviously they don't have the game yet. They're just fans making this thing. But then I started playing, like, demo mods. Because there were things where people made it so that I think you could play as the Black Sun in the demo through mods. And eventually, because this was the base game, Forces of Corruption hadn't come out yet. Thrawn wasn't a hero yet, and I had just read the Thrawn trilogy. I decided I wanted to put Thrawn into the game, so I started learning how to do the XML editing from that, and getting kind of impatient about the fact that these total conversion mods, I think I was like 13 or 14 at the time, these total conversion mods weren't coming out. And then Evil Jedi from Warlords free-released all of his models. That's a Homeworld 2 mod. And so I was like, okay, well, I got messaged by another guy, Videotech, who's like, oh, well, if you're doing this thing where you're putting Thrawn in, then maybe we could take all the Warlords models and put them in, which is kind of ironic considering almost from the start, we ended up deciding that we were never going to use free release models if we could help it. There's probably 3 or 4 in the mod, but a lot of mods ended up just taking these Warlords models, and a lot of those larger mods ended up dying because there were mods like a Galaxy Divider at the time, I think that was Sonic Zero, would take the models, rig them pretty poorly, throw them in game as fast as possible, and then they could say, hey, look at all these models I have in my mod, and then no one was as willing to help mods like Legacy of War, Imperial Assault, Ages of Star Wars, because they could just go and get these units elsewhere. And so it kind of pissed off all those mod leaders. And after a while, I was like, okay, well, I'm doing this thing with Thrawn. And by June, I got together Videotech and another guy, Zerteron, who was both of them were posters on the Legacy of War forums, which was where I was mostly active at the time. And Zer was more on the lore side because I didn't really know Star Wars lore very well. Me and Videotech decided, like, okay, we're gonna run the mod, we're gonna make this stuff, but we need Zer to tell us like what the hell anything is. So we got the three of us together and we decided that night we were going to make Thrawn's Revenge, which was going to be Thrawn's Revenge 1, Empire of the Hand, which was our Galactic Civil War era mod focusing on setting up the Empire of the Hand. Thrawn's Revenge 2 after that would be Imperial Civil War, which is what everyone knows now. And Fall of the Republic would be Thrawn's Revenge 3, which we'd make after Imperial Civil War. And there'd be like 5 different releases of Imperial Civil War with different combinations of playable factions, because we didn't understand at the time that you could do like more than 3 playable factions, even if there are some limitations. But yeah, that was kind of how it all started. I was kind of just confused as to why other mods were taking so long. Like, why isn't this released yet? And ended up just starting my own, because I partially just wanted Thrawn in the mod, or in the game. But then they released Forces of Corruption later that year, and he was in it anyways. But yeah, hopefully that answers that question, 3Goal. I know it got a bit rambly. I'm thinking about doing like a full history of Thrawn's Revenge video for our 14th anniversary. That's fucking weird. For our 14th anniversary this June. So maybe I'll talk more about that if you guys are interested. And then next question, Juan Marino. What is your process for determining what ship without an official design or reference image looks like in its implementation/role as it's going to into either Fall of the Republic and Imperial Civil War? So it really depends on what information is available. So for example, Blue Diver, we only ever get it referred to as a Mon Calamari heavy carrier. So we'd kind of take into account like what a Mon Calamari ships look like. What is this one going to be doing that's different from the other ones? So like obviously much larger hangar space. Heavier armor plating is generally what we're taking to be implied by the heavy there, because it's a carrier, so it's probably less to do with its own weaponry, and that kind of thing, and just kind of flesh it out around that. And the Chiss Star Destroyer is probably the biggest example of this, where we have the chaff and the ascendancy that came out of it, but where the books describe it as being this kind of like almost a VSD-ish, but without command superstructure. So we kind of decide, like, what do we have available from the faction that actually made that? And where can we take that to sort of fill the role that it needs to fill? And Valerie's been really good. Before, I would just take the information we had and try to model it freehand with no references. And that was how a lot of the Empire of the Hand stuff got made, where it was like, okay, I want it to be fast, so that's going to be big engines. That's going to be 4-engine hardpoints. The phalanx, actually, I designed while watching episode 3, because it's kind of supposed to be shaped like Grievous if he's laying down, is the way I kind of pictured it. So there's like the plating, the exposed plating around his chest, and then the hammerhead is actually like his head just facing forward. So yeah, that's what that is. But now, since we have Valerie and also Farshot doing actual designs for stuff, Farshot's working on a Mandator design right now, and it's basically taking what do we know about Kuat Drive Yard ships for the time, so design elements for the Praetor, from some acclimatory stuff, or for either the company that made it or the faction that's going to be using it. So both of those factor into it. What role is it going to fill relative to something else? So compared to like the Bellator, which is supposed to be a kind of jump off point from the later Mandator designs, and just trying to go from there. So take what little information we know about it, take the information we can infer about it, and then expand from that based on what we know about the faction that's going to be using it. So yeah, I hope that answered your question there, Juan. Thank you. Next up, we have Hawkeye Pierce. How do you make decisions regarding making something balanced or not game-breaking and true to lore? So I did talk about that a bit before, but I think there is something I will bring up here, Hawkeye. It's with things like super weapons. So that's another situation where we have to take into account the spirit of the lore and also the gameplay implications, where we've avoided doing super weapons because they end up just being a way to go through the galaxy and destroy everything. And that's not great. But then we have things like influence being introduced, where we will be able to do some kind of super weapons to destroy planets but have negative effects to it. So it really goes gameplay, spirit of the lore, exact lore. where having the like matching the spirit of the lore is kind of like the Empire of the Hand, for example. They have no official designs, but they took over most of the unknown regions. So we could give them, well, they have the Clawcraft. We could give them just the Clawcraft and a rough depiction of a Chiss Star Destroyer, and that would be matching the lore exactly. Where they have these two ships that show up, and we've just given them that, we haven't expanded on it at all. So that would be matching kind of like the letter of the lore, but it would be very unbalanced, and it wouldn't be matching the spirit of the lore, which is like, this is a faction that exists in the unknown regions. So we kind of try to act on stuff how we would expect another game to act. Like with the TIE Fighter games, if they introduced a fighter type, that's entirely their prerogative, and they did introduce a lot of fighter types. But if they introduce something where they don't need to, or if they overwrite the lore for no reason or to make the game worse, then that is kind of where we draw that line. But yeah, so between that and I think the original answer, hopefully that answered that question as well. So thank you, Hawkeye. I'm going to go to Asterix question. If Datapad would do an infrastructure of the Rebels or Empire, as I would like to know if there's any information about building ships, like is there any planets that are special in making armor for ships, or just ironers everywhere? That's definitely the logistics of shipbuilding is definitely an interesting topic for a Datapad video in the future. I will say that there are a lot of places that would do, like major shipyards tend to have subsidiaries. So Mon Calamari stuff, for example, even. Kuwad is the big example for this, but Mon Calamari stuff would even, they'd have the hulls built out on Mon Cal, and they often ship off to finish somewhere else. So in the Thrawn trilogy, there's all those Mon Calamari cruisers at Sluis Fan, where they were probably shipped from Mon Calamari to be finished at Sluis Fan, so that Mon Calamari shipyards could do the things that they do best. And then there was stuff like Kuat Drive Yards, which had Rathana, where they were building ships in secret, but that's also where they mine everything, so that Rathana was kind of more self-contained than other shipyards would have been. And they also had stuff like Zafel, I think was Kuat, but yeah, that'd make a good Datapad video. What's the next one? Thank you, Asterix, as well. Bez Nerds asks, are there any plans on making forays into Stellaris? So this is something that we considered before. Before we restarted Fall of the Republic, I started converting some of our models to go into Stellaris. This was a lot closer to Stellaris having just been released, where I don't understand the game deep enough to feel like I could make any deep game changes. And so it was just, I'm going to make ship packs because these are the things I want to use in Stellaris. But then people started coming out with other ship packs, and it just felt kind of redundant. Because ultimately what we're trying to do with the modding, and this kind of gets back to the question about what got me into modding Empire at War, is just making the stuff we want to play, which also makes it kind of easy to respond to certain criticisms. Like, at the end of the day, if people don't like what we're doing, we're making the things we want to play, and that's good enough for us. So Stellaris, I would say, is not impossible for us to do some stuff in. There are a bunch of us that really enjoy it, but I don't know about the logistics of us expanding into another game at the moment, because it does feel like the prevailing sentiment among the team is that people who are working on Empire at War want to work on Empire at War. There are some of us that would want to do other stuff as well, but usually the people who would want to do another project are also the people who would rather make our own game of some kind. So that, like, ship packs wouldn't be impossible. Some of our models, including some of our old Empire of the Hand ones, are being used by Fallen Republic and everything, so there are still going to be Thrawn's Revenge models in the game. But like, if we had people on the team who just knew how to mod Stellaris, and then I could get sort of involved in like directing that, helping with some of it here and there, but instead of all of us having to learn another game, then maybe. But yeah, that's kind of where we stand on that. Gabe is asking, since there's a running joke in Discord about the Wong invasion, is there any plans on integrating some of the new Jedi Order mod, which is a sub mod for 2.2, I believe, to shave time in development? Well, the Wong stuff isn't a joke, but the NJO sub mod, well, it was something that someone else made based on 2.1, actually, not 2.2. It's like a 6-year-old version of the mod. The assets they're using aren't stuff made by them even. It's stuff that's pulled from mods like Alliance and Yoden mod and like free releases and stuff. So again, as I said earlier, we make all of our own assets, and so we're making all those things ourselves that we're going to be using. We wouldn't be asking for anything from Alliance or from Yoden. The same rules apply to any Vaughn content we release as everything else we've done. We want to make them purpose-built for the mod, so it doesn't feel kind of like a hodgepodge. And with NJO, I kind of see it as like a Bizarro World TR, where instead of making the change that we did make, we just went in the direction of adding more content. It's like, it's good for what it does, but at the same time, we changed those things in Thrawn's Revenge for a reason. And as much as I try to not comment on other mods, with that one, it's basically, we've already made those comments on why we changed things from how they were. So, yeah, there's nothing that we really intend to match from that or pull from that. We'd be doing it how we handle most mechanics now, and would be making the assets ourselves, because we have a pretty large team. It's not really a huge strain on us. It's one or two more factions. It's a lot of work, but it's not the end of the world. But yeah. So thank you, Gabe. The next question is from Lord of Shaitan. How are you doing? I'm doing all right. I'm just haven't really changed my lifestyle much for self-isolation, which is kind of concerning, actually. So I'm probably going to try, once this is all over, to go out a bit more, like just for walks and stuff. I bought a bike when I moved here, back up to Ottawa, and it was stolen within like a week or two. That wasn't great. So maybe after I move, I'll buy another one and keep it inside. But yeah, thank you. Do you see Brady's question, do you see parallels in the state and mind of the Star Wars fandom to that of the ecclesiarchy in old Christianity, and the similar to the Disney and legend split to the schism that tore the Western Roman Catholic Church and Eastern Orthodoxy Church apart, and the danger that such dogmatism over pieces of fiction could entail? Furthermore, do you have a favorite flower? I don't have a favorite flower. In terms of the split over legends and canon, I guess canon being the key word here for the comparison you're making, I could say something about my own lack of religious belief there, but I won't. But I don't want to overstate the importance of it, because I feel like part of that and that characterization does grant the separation between legends and canon more gravity than it deserves, almost. Where, I mean, it's Star Wars. People can enjoy what they want to enjoy. There are people who enjoy legends. There are people who enjoy canon. And I guess the thing that tends to bother me most is just people not letting each other enjoy the things they want to enjoy. Where it's fine to say you don't like something, but there are some people for whom it crosses the line into, I don't like this and you're not allowed to like this, or you need to justify to me why you like this, which is, I think, where people think they're just saying something about why they don't like it, but it gets past the line of like, well, clearly it sucks because you're not willing to argue with me over this. And this goes both ways, whether it's canon, people who are defending canon talking about legends, or people who are defending legends talking about canon. Where it's like, if you enjoy episode 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9 in any order, that's fine. Or if you don't enjoy some of them, that's fine. But if other people do enjoy them, that's not a crime. And especially the harassment of people who make the content. And I'm talking not just about the sequel trilogy, but it's kind of like just replaying what happened with the original, or with the prequel trilogy, where Ahmed Best, Jake Lloyd, they've received so much online hate, and then Kelly Marie Tran received a lot of online hate. Daisy Ridley receives it, John Boyega, and it's not worth it. There's nothing you're going to say in an argument with these actors or actresses that like, you got this part, so fuck you. Why would you agree to be in Star Wars, this lifelong dream you had? And even like, which also kind of gives the idea that it's okay to go like, oh well, it's not their fault, but we should shit on the writers and directors. Like, no, they made this thing. You may disagree with the choices they made. You may disagree with why they did the things they did, or whatever. But it doesn't justify that, because the way I try to approach it is, whatever your opinion is on what the movies should have been, whether that is the prequels, whether that's the sequels, not the original trilogy, because no one went in with any expectations for that. Someone else had a different expectation, right? So no matter what movie they had made, someone would be reacting that way, if we take the premise that it is justified to react that way. You can express your distaste for it, but you don't need to go on Twitter and tag Rian Johnson or J.J. Abrams or Dave Filoni and be like, hey, fuck you, you ruined this thing I love. It's like, no, they were making... Like, Dave Filoni's been involved in Star Wars for like 20 years now. He was put in the position he is by George Lucas. And while his interpretation of certain things may be different from yours, or like, if you were a bigger fan of like Karen Travis's work, your point of view of Star Wars is going to be different from someone who leans more towards what Dave Filoni does, because they are slightly different interpretations. But at the same time, one isn't more valid than the other, unless you want to put forward that George Lucas is the most valid, in which case then Dave Filoni's is. But that doesn't mean that the stories that Karen Travis told didn't have value to the people who enjoyed them, or that they don't have value to the broader universe. And it's especially interesting because Legends came up, where there was less of this idea that it needed to be cohesive, and then it's only with these extra changes that it's become more cohesive. And there's been a lot going around recently, I think an IO9 article that was also shared by some people on Twitter, about how you can't let canon get in the way of stories, which is, it's an interesting point, because like, to me, the thing that I'm interested in about Star Wars is that it does have this continuing story, because I'm coming from it as someone who did like a history degree. That's what makes me interested in the universe, how the stories tie together. But at the same time, I have to accept that that's not what Star Wars exists to be. For some people, that's what they love. That's what they're trying to do with some parts of the universe. But at the same time, you have to accept that there will be some stories that don't fit in as well. Any author is going to have a different interpretation of what happened. And it's not like we're trying to extract some universal objective truth about the Star Wars universe that then gets reflected in the work, or you're trying to like put everything together to make that. And coming from it from the perspective of making the mod, we try to do that as much as we can, because we're trying to make a consistent picture that combines all these things. But we also have to accept that like, we're the ones trying to do that. The onus is on us for doing that, rather than on the universe for being that. Because again, it didn't start that way. There's a reason that the Clone Wars as depicted in the Thrawn trilogy is different from the Clone Wars as depicted in the prequels. And so the more there was an attempt to bring that together, the more there was an expectation that it should be brought together, and that anything else that comes out afterwards should be brought in. And I think that enjoying it on your own terms is what you should be doing. So like, you can dislike X media because, not my friend Ek, but like, you can dislike this piece of media because it doesn't fit into your picture, or the picture that is generally depicted as being the correct canon. And I think that's a really interesting conversation to have. That's one of the things I enjoy doing about it. But it also doesn't make authors bad people if they're not aware of that when they're setting up their own story and they do something different, or they're trying to tell a specific story. The canon should exist to inform the stories, or to allow the stories to exist, rather than the stories existing for the sake of the canon, if that makes sense. And I'm saying that as someone who pretty much primarily engages with Star Wars as the canon. So those are kind of my thoughts on that. But yeah, so take that or leave that as you will. Next question from Nash. I think I answered the favorite type of flower. I don't really have one. Nash Sam, thank you, Brady. What is your favorite ship from each faction? Republic, CS, Empire, and Rebellion. Republic is probably the Pelta. CIS is the Recusant, easy. Empire, Strike Cruiser. And Rebellion, Assault Frigate. I've actually really started liking the CR90 recently after doing the model for it. So I'm actually gonna go CR90. So we're going Pelta, Recusant, Strike Cruiser, CR90. And my answer will probably change next time I'm asked that question, except for the Recusant, which will always be the best ship. So thank you, Nash. And I think that's actually it. So if you have any questions for the next one, whether you are on YouTube or Patreon, if you're a patron, a channel member, a Twitch sub, there will be a post up on Patreon where you can submit more questions for this. And if you are watching on YouTube and you have a question for the April edition, then leave them in the comments and I will get through as many as possible. Hope you guys have enjoyed this. Again, it's kind of just my own rambly thoughts on things, no script prepared, but hope it was still interesting in some sort of way, or at least kept you occupied while doing the dishes or vacuuming or cleaning your room or something. So thanks for watching, everyone. Thanks for all the support and getting the channel to this point. And let me know what you think of the video format. Have a good one.